Once you've installed your AvePoint Online Services Salesforce apps within their necessary organizations and necessary sandboxes, you're ready to go into the tool and start to set up your backup settings. To do that, locate the Cloud Backup for Salesforce tile and click on it. In Cloud Backup for Salesforce, the first thing to note is that if you have connected to multiple Salesforce organizations, you can select them from the drop-down here at the top left. This is going to be important for doing things like restores or setting up sandbox seeding at a later time. Now obviously I'm working here in an environment that is already connected and is already set up, so we can see a few different things here on our dashboard. Where did this all come from? How did we get these backups to run? To do that, the first time going into Cloud Backup for Salesforce, go to the Settings tab. And on the Settings tab, we've got quite a few things to look at, but in particular for this video, if we scroll down a little bit, we have Backup Settings, Scheduled Backup Data Export, Security Profile, and Storage Location and Database. Let's start first here with our Backup Settings. In the Backup Settings, you can schedule how many backups you would like to take for your organization per day, up to 4. You can choose when the first backup will run, and any additional backups will be spread out normally throughout the day. You can determine your retention. If, for instance, you have licensed unlimited retention, you may choose to actually limit that if you like. And then below that, additional objects you may or may not want to include within your backup data, including your feed objects and your Salesforce share objects. In comparison to some of our other solutions, like for instance Cloud Backup for Microsoft 365, where you can tell it yes or no backup mailboxes, yes or no backup Teams, yes or no backup OneDrives, and so on, a Salesforce organization is really one entity that's made up of lots of different moving parts. So you wouldn't want to say just backup things at the object level, like account settings for that type of object. You want your account records. You would also want to include things like opportunities and any other types of child records. So we don't do that with the Backup for Salesforce tool. You are automatically covered. You do not have to make any decisions around what to back up, what not to, what the parent-child relationships are, what's valuable, what's not, and so on. You will back up everything. So really, I just come in here to determine when that's going to happen. Now, in addition to those backup settings, we mentioned a few other things. If I go down, the next thing I might want to think about would be my security, i.e. my encryption of my backup data. So if I click Manage, we can see in here that we can enable the security profile, and you've got 3 different ways to do this. The first one is you can determine here in Cloud Backup how you would like this to work. You can choose between 128 and 256-bit encryption. We know the greater the encryption, the more secure the content is, but of course that can slow down your backup jobs. You can generate encryption from a seed. That's a method that's been around for quite some time. You would need to paste the seed and then confirm it in here to generate your encryption keys. Or you can use the key generated from Azure Key Vault. Now, what does this mean, generated from Azure Key Vault? And I can see I've got 3 choices in here. Where do these choices actually come from? Well, these come from AvePoint Online Services. Back up here at the top, under Administration, if I go into Encryption Management, and you can see we've got the 3 set up here. Now, AvePoint provides encryption for you out of the box, so that's why default encryption profile exists, and that could be selected here. If you're fine with that, and if you're wondering what do we provide, it is AES level encryption. Data is encrypted both at rest and in transit. If, however, you would like to own your own encryption key, if you have an Azure subscription, you can go into Azure Key Vault and you can generate your own encryption key. The way that you would then use that for Salesforce Backup is at the AOS level, you would come to Encryption Management and choose Create, and you would fill in the information that you got when you generated your own Azure Key Vault encryption key. Once you saved that, it would be listed here, and you could come into Salesforce and you could choose the one that you wanted to use. Now, if you would like to use the same encryption key across various AvePoint solutions, let's say, for example, you have backup for Microsoft 365 and backup for Salesforce, and you want to make sure that everything is using the same key, well, you could just come up here, you could generate your own if that's what you wanted to do, and then clicking apply will make that the encryption key that's being used by the various solutions. In Salesforce, this gives you the ability to pick a different one, something other than what's being used, if that's something you wanted to do. So backup settings and encryption settings. The next thing to consider would be the storage location. Where do you want to store your backup data? This all comes down to whether or not you have licensed what we call BYOS, bring your own storage. As a default, AvePoint provides the storage, but if you choose to store your backup data in your own storage, well, that's easy enough. Make sure that that's part of your licensing agreement with AvePoint, and when you go into this screen, you will be able to put in the parameters for your own Azure storage location. You can also store your backup data in Amazon, and if you like, you can even do SFTP. Just be sure to let AvePoint know that that is something you want to do. If you are going to have your backup data stored with AvePoint hosted storage, you have no reason to go into that screen. And finally, scheduled backup data export. Scheduled backup data export allows you, as its name implies, to export backup data to CSV, and you can put that on a schedule. You can also manually export this as well from the History tab. So why would I do this? Well, some organizations like to have a secondary offline copy, and this is going to be an efficient way for you to do that. So you can say, all right, here's where I'm going to store where I want to export that to. And these are the same options, of course, that you would have seen, as I mentioned, over in the previous screen. And then down towards the bottom, you can set up the schedule. So pick your storage type, fill in the parameters to connect to the storage, and then put it on a schedule. When might I use that? Well, if we go over to the Restore tab, you'll notice you have Restore Records by importing CSV file. So if you have exported to CSV file. Now we're going to take a look at that in our recording on doing restore, so I'm not going to show that right here. But the logic here is, if the storage that you are using, your primary storage for your backup data, is inaccessible, but you have the CSV files, you can still execute a restore as necessary. So think of that setting essentially as a safeguard that some organizations like to have. And being able to put on a schedule means you don't have to manually execute on those types of operations. Now there are some additional settings in here that we will take a look at in some of our other recordings, but as far as getting the Cloud Backup for Salesforce tool up and running, protecting your data, these are the 4 settings that you're going to want to consider. Please note that back on the dashboard, if necessary, you can also initiate a manual backup. That way you're not just reliant on the schedule. Once again, why might I want to do something like that? Well, let's say you're about to roll out a major change into your Salesforce organization, maybe some customization as an example. You might want to take an org-wide backup right before you do that, but perhaps, according to your schedule, that backup would be 5 hours away if you were to wait for it. So you can come in here, you can back up the org now. As soon as that job is done, you're free to go and do whatever you need to do in your production environment, and the schedule will pick up right when the next job is set to go. So, scheduled backup settings, as well as the ability to do a manual organizational backup. Thanks for watching this short video on how to configure Cloud Backup for Salesforce backup settings.